Hey everyone, welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show on Reason and Theology. I want to talk about a couple of things today. Was Pope Honorius at the Sixth Ecumenical Council condemned as a heretic by way of an accident of history, or was this something that was planned in advance or just kind of happened as an accident? We're going to take a look at that because I don't see a whole lot of discussions on how this actually went down at the council. So once we take a look at that, we're also going to examine something from Vigano, who just came out with a book accusing Pope Francis. As a result of his excommunication, he has written a book about the affair. So just going to offer a few comments about that. But before we dive in, I do want to remind you, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. I would really appreciate your support. Hit the like button too. Okay, well, let me share my screen and just kind of recap maybe some material that you may have already seen, especially if you've been watching this channel. But for those who may be new to this discussion, it's certainly important for us to cover our bases. We're going to take a look here at the Sixth Ecumenical Council and Agatho's letter written to the emperor before we take a look at what Dom John Chapman has said about the case of the condemnation of Pope Honorius and how this actually went down, and again, whether or not this was kind of an accident of history. But to just, again, put things into perspective, it's important for us to be aware that several sessions prior to the condemnation of Pope Honorius as a heretic, there was this session where Pope Agatho, the Pope at the time, wrote a letter to the emperor, and that letter was read out loud to the council fathers. We're about to take a look at a snippet of it. And those council fathers accept this letter. They accept everything in it, completely on board with it. So they're on board with the claims that are being made in Agatho's letter. And what's interesting is in this letter, not only is there a claim that the teaching authority of the Pope, of the Bishop of Rome, will be indefectible. That is a fancy way of saying papal infallibility. But they also, not only in addition to accepting papal infallibility here in the form of Roman indefectibility for its teaching office, they also accept the claim of Agatho that all of the predecessors of Agatho, which includes Honorius, have been free from error and undefiled, and that Rome will remain undefiled unto the end. So there will never be a time that Rome gives way to teaching heresy. So this is what the council fathers, the same fathers who condemn Honorius, this is what they say several sessions prior in accepting Agatho's letter. So just for good measure, let's recap this or review this again for those of y'all who are familiar. But for those of y'all who haven't seen this before, this will be new info. Okay. It says, "For this is the rule of the true faith, which this spiritual mother of your most tranquil empire, the Apostolic Church of Christ, has both in prosperity and in adversity, always held and defended with energy, which it will be proved by the grace of Almighty God, has never erred from the path of the apostolic tradition." So the claim here is that Rome has never erred from apostolic tradition. It's never taught heresy, nor has she been depraved by yielding to heretical innovations. So it's never yielded to heresy. It's never erred in its teaching authority. And why? Is it just that it's just got lucky so far? No, it's based on a divine promise of Jesus, according to the council. It says, "But from the beginning she has received the Christian faith from her founders, the princes of the apostles of Christ, and remains undefiled unto the end." And so, in other words, she will be, Rome in its teaching authority will be undefiled. It will not yield to heresy. It will not teach heresy unto the very end. Undefiled unto the end. So that's Roman papal indefectibility. Again, a very fancy way of saying papal infallibility. And again, the teaching office of the Pope. Undefiled unto the end, according to the divine promise of the Lord and Savior himself. So according to a promise from Jesus. So why will it be undefiled in its teaching authority? Because Jesus promised it so. And here it says, here is where Jesus has promised, which he uttered in the holy gospel to the prince of the disciples, saying, Peter, Peter, behold, Satan has desired to have you, that he might shift you as wheat, but I have prayed for you that your faith fail not. And when you are converted, strengthen your brethren. Let your tranquil clemency therefore consider, since it is the Lord and Savior of all, whose faith it is that promised that Peter's faith should not fail, and exhorted him to strengthen his brethren. How it is known that all the apostolic pontiffs, that's the popes, the predecessors of my littleness, so all of my predecessors, Agathos says, which includes Honorius, have always confidently done this very thing. What have they done? Not yielded to heresy, not been depraved by yielding to heretical innovations, or erred from the path of apostolic tradition. That includes Honorius. Did they come back and say, no, 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 we don't agree with that? No, they accepted this at this session, the claim that all the popes have been free from heresy. They'll always be free from teaching heresy, undefiled unto the end, because of a divine promise of Jesus, not because a council said it or a church father said it, because Jesus promised that Peter and his successors would not fail. And this includes Honorius. For woe is me if I neglect, hold on, I missed a part. The predecessors of my littleness have always confidently done this thing, of whom also our littleness, since I have received this ministry by divine designation, wishes to be the follower, although unequal to them and least of all them. So would Pope Agatho have said that Honorius was a heretic, or that he taught heresy, rather? Agatho certainly wouldn't say that Honorius taught heresy. Would he say that Honorius was a heretic? Because there's a difference between, being a heretic, whether material or formal, whether you know it or not, and actually teaching it. There's certainly a difference. Would he have said that he would have taught heresy? No. No, Agatho would not have said that. And the Council Fathers at this point agreed with that. Now, Agatho is not the one who confirmed the anathema against Honorius. That was the successor of Agatho, Pope Leo II. Be that as it may, let's actually take a look at something that Dom John Chapman says in describing the situation of how Honorius was condemned, and whether or not it was kind of an accident of history that this thing really happened. There wasn't a real debate on the question. There wasn't a real examination of the case of Honorius. They did not look at Pope John IV's apology for Honorius, showing that he wasn't a heretic. They did not really look at what Maximus the Confessor said in his debate with Pyrrhus, the Patriarch of Constantinople. And they did not look at these things, didn't really examine the case of Honorius. He didn't get a fair shake. So how did he get condemned? Well, let's take a look at it. So Dom John Chapman, in his work, The Condemnation of Pope Honorius, says this. In the 12th session, March 12th, so we're now talking about a session after the part where they accepted that all of the popes were free from heresy, including Honorius, other documents were introduced which had been sent by Macarius to the emperor, but had not been read by the latter. The seal of the packet was broken and the documents read. The first was the letter of Sergius to Cyrus. Then came the supposed letter of Minas to Vigilius. And then, for the first time, appeared the letter of Sergius to Honorius, which had not been read at the Lateran Council. So back in Lateran 649, they did not consider the letter of Honorius in Sergius. Whenever Lateran 49 openly taught that the Pope is not only supreme, but also infallible, which had not been read at the Lateran Council, and that Pope's reply. The emperor had no knowledge of the contents of the packet. So, in other words, what they just opened up in the council, nobody knew what was going to be in this packet by Macarius. Nobody knew what was in there. Even the emperor didn't know. So they're opening this up live at the council. And in here, all of a sudden, is the situation. There's an appeal to the situation with Pope Honorius. The emperor had no knowledge of the contents of the packet, so that the reading of Pope Honorius's letter was doubtless unexpected by the papal legates, who presided. These are the representatives of the Pope. So they didn't even know what was going to be in it. All of a sudden, they're opening up this packet, and Macarius of Antioch is talking about how, hey guys, I'm not a heretic for being a monothelite, believing that Jesus only has one will. I'm not a heretic because the Pope said the same thing, Pope Honorius. And then they read the letter of Pope Honorius to Sergius, where he speaks of one will, although he doesn't mean it in the sense of the heresy of one will monothelitism, as Pope John IV and Maximus have demonstrated. So all of a sudden, this is a surprise for the papal legates, for the emperor. They didn't know that Honorius was going to be appealed to by Macarius for his heresy. So that the reading of Honorius's letter was doubtless unexpected by the papal legates who presided, though Macarius had thrice appealed to its authority previously and had already been condemned as a heretic. So Macarius is one to say, hey guys, you can't condemn me as a heretic because Pope Honorius back in the day said one will, so why are you getting on to me? All these pieces were now sent to Macarius in order that he might acknowledge them as his, and this he did. It was decided that Macarius could not now be restored, even if he repented, but that a new patriarch of Antioch must be made. On March 28th, the decision was given on the letters previously read. First, those of Sergius to Cyrus and Honorius are condemned as alien from the Orthodox faith and as following the false doctrines of heretics. So they didn't really look a whole lot into the situation. Macarius is just appealing to Pope Honorius for his heresy, even though Honorius did not believe in monothelitism. And they, at that point, just kind of, since it was unexpected and the heretic is now appealing to him, they kind of have to throw Honorius under the bus. Instead of, unfortunately, giving him a fair shake, looking at what he meant, they just threw him under the bus. And Honorius was condemned as alien from the Orthodox faith and as following the false doctrines of heretics, which again is not factually true. He did not actually hold to monothelitism. If you just read his letters, that's clear. He's talking about how the one human will, as opposed to a discussion about the divine will, he's talking about the human will of Jesus. And he says that one human will is not divided between concupiscence or something like it is with our human will. We're divided between concupiscence and what we know we should do. We have a conflict within our human will. It's somewhat divided. He's saying, no, his human will is not divided like that. It's not impacted by concupiscence. It's just one will. He's not denying that Jesus also has a divine will. So it's clear from the context, that's what he was talking about. He's not affirming monothelitism. But since he uses the phrase one will, it was easy for people to throw him under the bus and misunderstand him. Also, the secretary of Pope Honorius, who was writing down these letters, testified that's not what he meant by one will. He did not mean monothelitism. And again, John IV wrote an apology for him, explaining that, Maximus the confessor as well. So it's clear this is just factually not true. He was not a monothelite, but he was condemned as such, kind of as an accident of history here. And so it says, then those whose impious dogmas we execrate, we judge that their names shall not be, or shall also be cast out of the holy church of God. That is Sergius, who was prelate of this God-protected and royal city and was the first to write about this impious dogma. Cyrus of Alexandria, Pyrrhus, Paul, and Peter, who presided on the throne of this God-protected city, and who held the same view as the others, and also Theodore, who was bishop of Ferrara, all which persons were mentioned by Agatho, the most holy and blessed Pope of Elder Rome, in his letter to the most pious and divinely strengthened and great emperor, and were cast out by him as holding views contrary to our Orthodox faith. And these we define to be subject to anathema, and in addition to these, we decide that Honorius also, who was Pope of Elder Rome, be with them cast out of the holy church of God. So they're condemning someone who had already died, who died in the peace of the church, by the way, who had already died in the peace of the church, and has already gone to his maker to be judged. Now they're judging him. And be anathematized with him, because we have found by his letter to Sergius that he followed his opinion in all things and confirmed his wicked dogmas. In reality, he did not. But the council is saying that Honorius did confirm the heresy of monothelitism. promoted by Sergius. So it continues, the words of the council are accurate. The Roman legates raised no objection. It is clear that St. Agatho had not wished to provoke the condemnation of his predecessor, but the resolution must have been proposed to the council by his legates, who were its presidents, and they must have known that he would not disapprove. I don't agree with that at all. It's very clear, according to Agatho's letter, he would not approve of the claim that he had taught this kind of heresy. On the other hand, the condemnation of Honorius might never have been proposed or deemed needful had not his letters been read among the documents presented by Macarius to the emperor, and which the emperor had not looked at. You know, it's likely if the emperor had seen this in advance, he would not have had it read out at the council. It was almost an accident, Dom John Chapman says. But he says, but so far as justice was concerned, a happy accident. However, we may regret the unfortunate controversial uses to which the condemnation has been put in modern times. He's talking about Protestants and also the old Catholics who rejected papal infallibility at Vatican I on the grounds of Honorius and a few others. The representatives of the emperor now had other writings of the heretics read through the council, and so he talks about the rest of it. But notice that it happened by way of accident. It wasn't really even intentional to begin with that Honorius was going to be put up on the chopping block. What happened is they were judging Macarius of Antioch for being a monothelite. Macarius basically sends a packet to the council, had not been read by the emperor or the papal legates. All of a sudden it's being read and they don't know what's in it. And he's now appealing to the Pope, Honorius, saying Honorius believed my heresy too, so you can't condemn me for being a heretic unless you're going to condemn the Pope. And they went ahead and threw Honorius under the bus. This is the sad reality of the history involved here, and I am very sad to say this is not the only time we've seen this kind of behavior from ecumenical councils, as I've covered in detail. There was a lot of stuff that went down at these councils that you might say, maybe more could have been done there in examining some of these figures, some of the people involved. And that has to be admitted because, frankly, you would not even have the Fifth Ecumenical Council if it wasn't for the fact that Chalcedon, the Fourth Ecumenical Council, didn't really do a sufficient job when it comes to the three chapters. So that's just a historical fact. So you need to keep this in mind next time somebody brings up the Honorius issue. Yeah, keep this in mind. In Catholicism, are councils infallible in matters of fact? No. Are they infallible in matters of faith and morals when they teach definitively? Yes. Yes, they are. So in condemning monothelitism, is the council infallible? Yes. In condemning Honorius, is the council infallible? No. Not at all. So you can't classify it as a dogma, right? There's nowhere in the deposit of faith that Honorius is a heretic, right? And you can't even classify it as a secondary object of infallibility because it's not necessary for faith and morals to say that Honorius was a heretic. There's nothing inherent to that claim to protect dogmatic claims. And so, there's no infallibility beyond that, beyond things that are part of the deposit of faith or necessarily related to the deposit of faith. The church doesn't have infallibility outside of that. So it's clear that the council can make mistakes in matters of fact. And this is why Anastasius Bibliothecarius, the papal librarian, around the time of the Eighth Ecumenical Council, notes the same thing. And guess what he brings up as an example of where a council can make a mistake in a matter of fact? You guessed it, the case of Honorius. Interestingly enough, the Eighth Ecumenical Council, which I've examined here many times on this channel, but to summarize, the Eighth Ecumenical Council says no pope can be judged for heresy, not by a patriarch, not by a council, not by a layman, not by a priest, not by a bishop. No one can judge the pope for heresy except another pope. In other words, the only one who can judge a pope is another pope. How does that work? It would be a living pope judging a predecessor pope, as you have here in the case of Leo II, who confirmed Constantinople III and judged his predecessor Honorius. That is the only case, according to the Eighth Ecumenical Council, where a pope can be judged. And so Whether or not those judgments are infallible, again, the answer would be no, they're not. The popes can make mistakes here, but it is only popes who can judge other popes. So a living pope can judge a predecessor pope. And again, the council notes that's exactly what happened with Constantinople III. So if you have like a council who is judging another pope, Canon 21 of Constantinople IV, the Eighth Ecumenical Council, wants to say the council can't judge another pope unless the pope himself, like the living pope, is on board with that council judging a predecessor pope. And they again appeal to Constantinople III as an example. Anyways, it's pretty clear this seems to have been an accident of history. And it's pretty clear when you look into the situation that he got the short end of the stick and was thrown under the bus and was not properly evaluated. That's not really controversial. I think most educated Catholics know that he got the short end of the stick and was wrongly condemned. But what you may not know is kind of how it happened, how he was thrown under the bus, how it was kind of spontaneous and perhaps an accident of history on how it happened. For a while, popes were required to profess their condemnation of Honorius when they were elevated to the papacy, but you'll notice that eventually the church dropped that. And it also dropped the condemnation that was found elsewhere, like in the breviary, for instance. And so it seems that the church has kind of dialed back the claim that Honorius was a heretic by reversing some of those things. And in kind of a silent way has somewhat reversed and walked those claims back. Anyways, I want to next examine some other material here with Vigano, but I first wanted to cover this stuff with Pope Honorius with you. Before we go ahead and dive into the next topic, though, for those of y'all just now tuning in, I want to remind you, hit that subscribe button. Really would appreciate it. All right, going to meet back here in just a moment right after this ad, and we will take a look at the situation with Vigano. Are you seeking clarity in the midst of confusion about Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism? In my book, Answering Orthodoxy, I offer a biblical and historical response to the most common objections the Eastern Orthodox offer against the Catholic Church. This book is for anyone searching for the truth, whether you're Catholic, Orthodox, or simply trying to make sense of the differences between Catholics and Orthodox. Order your copy today and discover the rational, biblical, and historical basis for the Catholic Church. Visit Amazon to order your copy today. Are you ready to deepen your faith and sharpen your understanding of theology? Welcome to the Center for Theological Research, your gateway to transformative learning. At CTR, you will find in-depth courses designed to equip you with the tools to grow in your understanding of the faith. Explore courses like the 7 Ecumenical Councils and uncover the foundational truths that shape Christianity. Master the ability to determine the level of a doctrine in the Theological Notes course. And in the Logical Fallacies and Apologetics course, you'll learn to spot the logical errors often encountered in non-Catholic apologetics content. Also, check out the ebooks that are available to you for free. Start your journey today. Visit ctresearch.org and take the next step in your faith formation. Glinda asks, off topic because I struggle to understand the current Catholic mindset regarding Honorius. Are they trying to draw parallels with Pope Francis? Is false teachings or a group excuse they can disregard him? Okay, I think I understand what you're asking. So, yeah, some people try to claim that Pope Francis teaches heresy, and they try to justify that with the claim of Honorius. It fails because, number one, Constantinople IV said you can't judge the Pope. You can't say that he has taught heresy. It's very explicit about that. Canon 21. It says the only one who can do that is another pope. The Holy See itself can judge a predecessor pope, Rome. No one other than that. And it is very clear, not in writings, not in tracts, not in councils, nothing. Nobody, patriarch, nobody can judge another pope. So already the analogy fails. Number two, Honorius was a heretic. Number three, the council, same one that condemned him as a heretic, is the same council that had accepted several sessions prior to that Honorius as having been free from any heretical innovation, and accepting Agatho's teaching that all of the popes were undefiled unto the end. including Honorius. So, got to keep that in mind. What did they contradict themselves at that point? Some might think that they just contradicted themselves. Others might say, well, no, they accepted that, no pope, including Honorius, had taught heresy in their magisterium, but when they condemned him later as a heretic and sharing in the opinion of Sergius, they're talking about in his private person. And can a pope be a heretic, outside of his magisterium, outside of what he teaches? Well, if it's material, yes, I think everybody agrees, of course. If it's formal, no, I think Pastor Eternus would be sufficient to indicate that there is a promise. The gift of truth and never failing faith was conferred on Peter and his successors, according to Pastor Eternus at Vatican I, and that would seem to exclude the notion of a formal heretic pope. So might they have meant basically, they were judging Honorius in his private person, but not in his magisterium? Maybe. And is that a way to reconcile the apparent contradiction here with this council? Yeah, it's a possibility. Whether you accept it or not is a different question, but it is something that I throw out as an option to say that they're not just contradicting themselves. Okay, so let's take a look at the situation with Vigano. Just came out with a book. I don't recommend the book, but I do want to bring it to your attention, probably because other people are likely bringing it to your attention as well, and it's good for us to talk about these things. J'accuse, I accuse, to shed light on my excommunication, Archbishop Vigano. So some people have been joking online. The accuser is at it again. It's a little on the nose, right? I accuse. Well, there's also Satan, who's kind of known for making some accusations as well. Vigano, can he actually accuse the papacy of teaching heresy or accuse Pope Francis? No, he can't, according to, as we've seen, Constantinople 4. He's also just factually mistaken overall, but he has nonetheless put out a book on the matter. Let's see. The English version on the back cover says, excommunicated by Pope Francis, Vigano has turned the table on Bergoglio, accusing him of apostasy for abandoning the apostolic tradition of the Catholic Church. Oddly enough, it would be Vigano, from the Catholic perspective, who has abandoned the apostolic tradition, because Vigano embraces both schism and heresy, but which seeks to preserve Christ's message of salvation and redemption in favor of a progressive LGBTQ woke agenda based on values foreign to Catholic theology. So he's saying the Pope is woke. Following his excommunication by Pope Francis, Vigano accuses Bergoglio of being a heretic to the true Catholic Church. Vigano argues that Bergoglio has departed from Christ's message of salvation and redemption in favor of the woke agenda that harks back to the progressive nature of Vatican II in the 60s. So they're throwing Vatican II under the bus as well. Presenting here for the first time the penal decree that the Vatican issued a prelude to an excommunication hearing, we can see for ourselves that the Vatican has sought to silence Vigano because of his strong denunciation of Bergoglio's embrace of a New World Order ideology that His Excellency Vigano has condemned as satanic. That, or Vigano automatically excommunicated himself for denying that Francis is the Pope, and the Vatican just simply said, yeah, you've excommunicated yourself for the sin of schism. It's one of the two, right? I'll let you be the judge which one it is. In J'accuse, Vigano presents a breathtaking examination of the Catholic Church's fall from grace since the Second Vatican Council. Wow, Catholic Church can fall from grace? What? And you think Francis is the heretic? Interesting. In these pages, Vigano details how Bergoglio and the Vatican hierarchy propagated a deep church scandal that made Bergoglio's conciliar church a counterfeit of the true Catholic theology that Archbishop so brilliantly proclaims and defends, which the thesis here would be absolutely heretical. The thesis is that the visible institution is now a counterfeit church. Does that sound familiar? You remember that before? That's Martin Luther's position. That is the Protestant reformers' position. This is Protestantism just with nice vestments. That's all it is. It's also Eastern Orthodoxy on this particular point. Both of them believe that the Catholic Church, in communion with Rome, I should say, has defected. Now, Eastern Orthodoxy has a different view than Protestantism insofar as they believe that they still have bishops. That is the true Catholic Church. Whereas Protestantism doesn't identify it in any kind of visible institution. So there is a difference then between Protestants and Eastern Orthodox on that particular point. But the notion that somehow the structure, the institution that Jesus established, could it fail and become a counterfeit? That is 100% Protestant. And yet that is 100% what Vigano is promoting for people. Okay, so that's kind of interesting, but partly what he bases this on is the claim that Francis isn't the Pope. But as I've pointed out, the notion of peaceful and universal acceptance of a Pope ensures that the one who is identified by the whole church as Pope is in fact the Pope, is not an anti-Pope, is not a counterfeit. Here's what Bio says. Finally, whatever you still think about the possibility or impossibility of the aforementioned hypothesis of a pope falling into heresy, at least one point must be considered absolutely incontrovertible and placed firmly above any doubt whatever. The adhesion of the universal church will always be in itself an infallible sign of the legitimacy of a determined pope, and therefore also the existence of all conditions required for legitimacy itself. It is not necessary to look far for the proof of this, but we find it immediately in the promise of the infallible providence of Christ. The gates of hell will not prevail against it, and behold, I shall be with you all your days. For the adhesion of the church to a false pope would be the same as its adhesion to a false rule of faith. But make no doubt that that's actually what Vigano is saying, which is 100% not Catholic. Seeing that the Pope is the living rule of faith, which the church must follow, and which, in fact, she always follows, as will become even more clear by what we shall say later, God can permit at times a vacancy in the apostolic see be prolonged for a long time. He can also permit that doubt arise about the legitimacy of this or that election. He cannot, however, permit the whole church accept as pontiff him who is not truly and legitimately Pope, which is exactly what has happened in Vigano's mind. The whole church is saying Francis is the Pope, except for a minor fringe group of people. Everybody's saying that he is. And certainly at the time of his elevation in election, everyone was saying he's Pope. Well, that's enough to ensure that he actually is Pope. Because if everybody was saying at the time of his election that he's Pope and he's not Pope, then the church has defected from the faith. The gates of hell has prevailed against it. Protestants or Eastern Orthodox were right all along. He also says, therefore, from the moment in which the Pope is accepted by the church, so when he was originally elected, united to her as the head of the body, it is no longer permitted to raise doubts about a possible vice of election. So you can't say, as Vigano tries to say, that, well, maybe he wasn't legitimately elected, or a possible lack of any condition whatsoever necessary for legitimacy. For the aforementioned adhesion of the church heals in the root all fault in the election and proves infallibly the existence of all the required conditions. So it heals in the root any defects, and it also proves that there weren't any defects. But even if there were, it heals in the root any defects that were there. So you can't even say, well, he wasn't properly elected. Well, the church as a whole has embraced him as Pope. So you can't say he's not Pope. All right, so what does Vigano's claim amount to? Well, it amounts to schism, and that's why he was, the Vatican recognized that he had automatically excommunicated himself. I'll also add this from Pastor Eternus from Vatican I. It says, for the Holy Spirit was promised to the successors of Peter, not so that they might by his revelation make known some new doctrine, but that by his assistance they might religiously guard and faithfully expound the revelation and deposit of faith transmitted by the apostles. Indeed, their apostolic teaching was embraced by all the venerable fathers and reverenced and followed by all of the holy Orthodox doctors, for they knew very well that this see of St. Peter always remains unblemished by any error. Does that sound familiar? It should, because that's exactly what we just looked at moments ago when we saw Agatho's letter at Constantinople III, undefiled unto the end. It's appealing to Constantinople III. In accordance with the divine promise of our Lord and Savior to the prince of his disciples, I prayed for you that your faith would not fail, and when you have turned again, strengthen your brethren. Again, a direct quote from Constantinople III. The gift of truth and never failing faith was therefore divinely conferred on Peter and his successors in this see. So there is a gift of truth and a never failing faith. This would indicate the Pope may be materially a heretic. That is, unknowingly, he believes some kind of heresy, but he can never obstinately and formally embrace it. Like once it's brought to his attention, he just like, no, I'm going to maintain this heresy. No. And why? Why can't that happen? Why can't the Pope be a formal heretic? Because there is a gift here, a never failing faith that is given to Peter and his successors. Why? So that they might discharge their exalted office for the salvation of all, and so that the whole flock of Christ might be kept away by them from the poisonous food of air and be nourished with the sustenance of heavenly doctrine. Thus, the tendency to schism is removed and the whole church is preserved in unity, and resting on its foundation can stand firm against the gates of hell. But see, Vigano doesn't believe that. Vigano doesn't believe that at all. Because Francis is the Pope, and he's broken communion with him. But Pastor Eternus teaches we have this papacy, and we have the Pope, and we have Pope Francis, so that we don't have schisms. If you're following Pope Francis and his magisterium, you won't have schism. You're only going to have schism if you're going against him in his magisterium. But if you're following his magisterium, unity is preserved and there's no schism. One other thing. The same council, Vatican I, Pastor Eternus, says, therefore, if anyone says that it is not by the institution of Christ that the Lord himself, that is to say, by divine law, that blessed Peter should have perpetual successors in the primacy over the whole church, or that the Roman pontiff is not the successor of blessed Peter in this primacy, let him be anathema. So the claim is that there's going to be perpetual successors. The difficulty for Vigano and many other sedevacantists like him is going to be, okay, what happens when the next pope is elected and he confirms the magisterium of Pope Francis? You're going to say he's not a pope as well. Okay. What happens when the next pope after that confirms their predecessors, including Pope Francis, and their magisterium? Well, you're going to say they're not pope either. And it's going to continue to go on. Okay. So we're going to get to a point where Vigano is going to be forced to say, well, I guess there aren't perpetual successors. That's the problem with sedevacantism. In addition to how in the world are you going to elect another pope when all of the cardinals have been appointed at this point? Most of the cardinals who are going to choose the next pope have been appointed by Pope Francis. And once they choose somebody and that person confirms the magisterium of Pope Francis, you're just going to say, well, they're not legitimate either. But we're going to end up going against this notion that there are perpetual successors to the papacy. And that's the problem ultimately with sedevacantism. Well, anyways, I just wanted to briefly touch on this since people are talking about that new book that has just come out by Vigano. Keep these things in mind. I hope it was helpful in kind of giving you perspective on this situation. If it was, let me hear your feedback. Put it in the comment section. Hit that subscribe button. I would really appreciate your support. And don't forget to check out my courses either on the 7 ecumenical councils at ctresearch.org. And also, I'm going to have a course on the magisterium coming out soon, so stay tuned for that. And be sure to check out my book, Answering Orthodoxy, at Amazon.com if you want to get a good insight on why Eastern Orthodoxy isn't a proper alternative to Catholicism and the crisis in the Catholic Church. All right, we'll see you later. Are you ready to deepen your faith and sharpen your understanding of theology? Welcome to the Center for Theological Research, your gateway to transformative learning. At CTR, you will find in-depth courses designed to equip you with the tools to grow in your understanding of the faith. Explore courses like the 7 ecumenical councils and uncover the foundational truths that shape Christianity. Master the ability to determine the level of a doctrine in the Theological Notes course. And in the Logical Fallacies and Apologetics course, you'll learn to spot the logical errors often encountered in non-Catholic apologetics content. Also, check out the ebooks that are available to you for free. Start your journey today. Visit ctresearch.org and take the next step in your faith formation. Are you seeking clarity in the midst of confusion about Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism? In my book, Answering Orthodoxy, I offer a biblical and historical response to the most common objections that Eastern Orthodox offer against the Catholic Church. This book is for anyone searching for the truth, whether you're Catholic, Orthodox, or simply trying to make sense of the differences between Catholics and Orthodox. Order your copy today and discover the rational, biblical, and historical basis for the Catholic Church. Visit Amazon to order your copy today.